Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. So, in today's lecture, we will be looking at the probability as a tool in genetics. So, there are two rules uh, of the probability used in genetics. One is the multiplication rule, and second one is the addition rule. And then we will look at the applications of probability to genetic crosses. So first of all, let us have a look at the probability. So previously, uh, if you remember, uh, Punnett scale was used to describe the phenotypic and genotypic ratios of different crosses, and an alternate method for determining the outcome of a genetic cross is to use the rules of probability. Uh, because as the Mendel was also doing crosses and using these type of things, and probability actually expresses the likelihood of the occurrence of a particular event. So when we want to calculate the probability, what we do, and it is very easy, and it is just the number of times that a particular event occurs, and then we divide by the number of all possible outcomes. So that will be the probability of that particular event. So before going into the details, just have a look at this figure. Uh, this is the figure of different cards. If you, some of you have played this game. So in this game there are total 52 cards, and from these 52 cards, if you want to draw a particular card, for example, if we want to draw king of ace, so what will be the probability? So from this figure, and in this figure there are 52 cards. If you want to draw any one card, so you can calculate the probability of drawing that card from the whole bunch of those cards. So this is the total sample space for choosing a card from the deck. So now let us look at this example in detail. So a deck of 52 cards contain only one king of heart, and the probability of drawing one card from the deck at random and obtaining the king of hearts is 1 by 52, because there is only one king of hearts, because there is only one card that is king of heart, and that is actually one event. So there are 52 cards that can be drawn from the deck, and there are 52 possible outcomes. So therefore probability will be 1 by 52. So probability of drawing a card and obtaining an ace is 4 by 2, 4 by 52, because there are 4 ace in all those 52 cards. So because there are 4 cards that are aces, so they are actually 4 events, and there are total 52 cards. So these are the possible outcomes. So from these 52 possible outcomes, there are 4 possible outcomes that ace will be obtained. So probability can be expressed either as a fraction. We can write it as 4 by 52, and we can also write this in decimal form. So then it will be 0.077. So probability of a particular event may be determined by the by knowing something about how the event occurs and how often it occurs. So if we know these two things, that how the event is happening and how often it is happening, then we will be able to calculate the probability of that particular event. So similarly, probability of rolling a six-sided die and getting a 4 is 1 by 6, and that is because the die has 6 sides and any one side is equally likely to end up on the top. So we need 4 on the top, and there are 6 sides of that cube. So if we want to get the probability of 4, it will be 1 by 6, because there are total 6 events that can happen, and from those 6 events, only one there is one chance that 4 will be on the top. So in this case, understanding the nature of event, the shape of the thrown die, it was important, and this allowed us to determine the probability. So in other cases, we determine the probability of an event by making a large number of observations. For example, when weather forecast is done, the weather forecaster says that there is, for example, let us say that there is 40% chance of raining on a particular day. Then this probability is obtained by observing a large number of days from the previous data. So then the average is taken, and then the forecaster says that there is a 40% chance that, by looking at the data, they have seen that on, if there are total 100 days, then from those 100 days, on 40 days there was rain. So they are predicting that there is a 40% chance of rain at that particular day. So uh, in this case, the probability has been determined empirically. So the first, now coming towards the first rule of probability, the multiplication rule of probability. There are two rules we already know that are useful for predicting the ratios of offsprings produced in the different genetic races. So the first rule is multiplication rule, and it states that the probability of two or more independent events occurring together is calculated by multiplying their independent probabilities. So for example, uh, if we want to roll a die, and in a large number of sample rolls, on average 1 out of 6 times uh, we want to obtain a 4, so its probability will be 1 by 6. So if we want 4 on the top, then its probability will be 1 by 6, because this die has 6 sides. And then uh, if we roll the die again, then probability of obtaining the 4 again will be 1 by 6. So if we want to get the probability of getting 4 on the top on two sequential rolls, then what will be our calculation? So probability during first roll was 1 by 6, and probability of second roll was also 1 by 6, obtaining 4 on top. Probability of obtaining 4 on the top in both events is 1 by 6. So if we want to uh, get the combined probability of these two events, we will just multiply these two events, and then the probability of these two events will be 1 by 36. So these are both independent events. They are not dependent on one another. So in the case of independent events, when the events are independent, then we multiply the independent probabilities to get the collective probability of those two events. And second rule is the addition rule of probability. And it states that the probability of any one of two or more mutually exclusive events is calculated by adding the probabilities of these events. So to obtain the probability of throwing a die once and rolling either a 3 or a 4, so now it is totally different situation. So we would use the addition rule of probability. So adding the probability of obtaining 3 is 1 by 6, to the probability of obtaining a 4 again is 1 by 6. So 1 by 6 plus 1 by 6 is equal to 1 by 3. So Keep in mind that the key indicator for applying the addition rule are the words either or are, either and are. So these words either or will represent that these events are mutually exclusive and they are not independent events. They are not dependent on one another. So if this type of thing is happening, then we will use the addition rule. But if the events are independently happening and we want their collective probability, then multiplication rule of probability will be used. So as we look, if we look at this figure, so if we want to obtain the probability that either 3 or 4 will be on the top, then first we will calculate the independent probability of these two events, and because they are mutually exclusive, therefore we will not multiply them, we will just add them, and by adding 1 by 6 to 1 by 6 is 1 by 3. So these are the two rules which are used to calculate the probability according to our needs. So for the addition rule to be valid, the events whose probability is being calculated must be mutually exclusive. So this you should uh, keep in mind this thing, that mutually exclusive events are necessary for applying the addition rule. So if the events that are happening, they are not mutually exclusive, they are independent, they are not linked to one another, then we will use multiplication rule. So this mutually exclusive thing means that one event excludes the possibility of the occurrence of other events. So think about this, that which type of events can be mutually exclusive, and think about the examples also. Then we will discuss when we'll be talking on during the online session. Then we can discuss about the example, some real life examples. So, for example, you cannot throw a single dice. So if we look at the example of this dice having 6 sides, so we cannot obtain a 3 and 4 at the same time. So it is not possible that when we are getting 3, we can also get 4. So this is not possible, because if 3 is coming, then 3 is excluding the possibility of happening 4. So therefore these are the mutually exclusive events. So when the events are not linked, then the addition rule of probability will be used to calculate the collective combined probability. So now coming towards the application of probability and how they are applied, how these rules are applied to the genetic crosses. The multiplication and addition rules of probability can be used in place of the Punnett square. Punnett square is a very easy method. You just make 4 boxes and just put alleles on 2 sides, here and here, for 2 parents, and then just by combining these 2 here and this here, and similarly this one and this one in this box. So in this way, this seems very easy method. Punnett square seems very easy method of calculating the probabilities and ratios of different uh, crosses to predict the ratio of progeny expected from a genetic cross. So let us first consider a cross between two pea plants, heterozygous for the locus that determines the height. So for example, this is one parent and this is second parent. Both has capital T small t, capital T small t as a genotype. So half of the gametes produced by each plant have a capital T allele and the other half have a small t allele. So the probability of for each type of gamete is 1 by 2. So half of the gametes will be receiving capital T and half of the gametes will be receiving small t in both parents separately. So the probability is 1 by 2. So the gametes from the two parents can combine in four different ways to produce the offsprings when they will be combining. So there are four different ways. So using the multiplication rule, we can determine the probability of each possible type. So to calculate the probability of obtaining capital T progeny from the cross where both parents are heterozygous for the tallness, so we multiply the probability of receiving a T allele from the first parent, that is 1 by 2, and we'll multiply the probability of receiving a T allele from the second parent, that is also 1 by 2. So why we are using multiplication rule of probability? The multiplication rule should be used here because, so you should keep these things in mind. And we need the probability of receiving a T allele from the first parent and a capital T allele from the second parent. So these are two independent events. So they are not linked events. So the four types of progeny from the cross where parents are heterozygous. So their associated probabilities are also given. For example, if we need probability of capital T, so capital T, capital T alleles are coming from both parents. So the probability of both is 1 by 2 and 1 by 2 because 50% gametes will be having capital T and 50% will be having small t in both parents. So when we because these are the independent events, so we will multiply these two and there will be probability will be 1 by 4. So uh, probability of obtaining capital T genotype in the cross where parents are heterozygous is 1 by 4. This means that one plant out of 4 will be having capital T genotype and its phenotype will be tall. Similarly, if we need capital T, small t, so the probability is same for both independent events, and in this case also probability will be 1 by 4, and also in other two cases probability will be 1 by 4 and 1 by 4. And when two recessive alleles are present, then phenotype will be short. And in this way, by using the rules of probability, multiplication rule of probability, we can calculate the probability of different phenotypes and genotypes. So and we don't need to make a Punnett scale. So the two methods have now been introduced to solve the genetic classes. We already know about the Punnett scale, and now we have learned how the probability method is used. The probability Punnett scale method is very easy. You have already done in your secondary school classes and even during your college days. So this is very easy, but now we have also introduced the probability method. So now a question arises that why bother with probability rules and calculations? Because Punnett scale is easier to understand and just as quick. So why we are using the probability instead of Punnett scale? So for simple, if the answer is that for simple monohybrid crosses, the Punnett scale is very simple than the probability method and is just as easy to use. But when you need to tackle more complex cases, there are not only monohybrid crosses, always monohybrid crosses. So there can be some different complicated situations also. So when they are concerning two or more loci, then the probability method is clear as well as quicker than the Punnett scale. So, and when the number of genes will be increasing, so you will not be able to make a Punnett scale, and in that cases, the use of probability is a very good method of determining the ratios. So next is the binomial expansion and probability. So when using probability, it is important to recognize that there may be several different ways in which a set of events can occur. So for example, consider two parents and both heterozygous for albinism. They have albinism, and albinism is a recessive condition. So in albinism, individuals have pigmentation problems. They cannot synthesize the melanin in their skin cells, and because of that, their skin is fair, and their hairs are also white, and even their eyes are having no pigments. So the probability of their having a child with albinism, there are two parents, and uh, the probability of having a child with albinism is 1 by 4, and the probability of having a child with normal pigmentation is 3 by 4. So how these probabilities are calculated? These are based on the Mendelian principles, the experiments of Mendel, which he performed on pea plants, and he gave us the ratios. So when we'll be dealing with single gene disorders or single gene traits, so we'll always use these ratios. So our expected values for the probability of having a child with albinism is always 1 by 4, and probability of having normal children, a normal child is 3 by 4. So now suppose we want to know the probability of this couple having three children and all with albinism. So in this case, there is only one way in which they can have three children with albinism. So these three ways are that their first child has albinism, their second child has albinism, and their third child has albinism. So here we simply apply the multiplication rule because all these three events are independent events, and probability of each event is 1 by 4. Every time you have 1 by 4, 1 by 4, and 1 by 4. So we simply multiply these three independent events and we get 1 by 64, and this 1 by 64 is the probability that their three children will be with albinism. So this is very easy and simple situation. But what is the probability for this couple having three children, one with albinism and two with normal pigmentation? So now the situation is more complex. And what can we do now? Because first event will be, so we have already talked that there are two things that are important, that uh, how a thing is happening and how often it is happening. So if we know that, then we can easily calculate the probabilities. So now the situation is that what is the probability of this couple having three children, and in those three children, one with albinism and two with normal pigmentation. So in that case, we will determine the three sequences. So there will be a chance that their first child is affected, and there is a chance that their second child might be affected, and there is also a chance that their third child might be affected. So these are three different sequences. And if we look at the first sequence, so probability of having, if the first affected child is 1 by 4, and then probability of having second normal child is 3 by 4, and similarly third child is 3 by 4, and we will get the probability 9 by 4. And similarly, when the second child is affected, the same probability is obtained, and when third child, probability of third child is being the third child is affected, then probability will be same. So because either the first or the second or the third sequence produces one child with albinism and two with normal pigmentation. So now there is the either or situation. So we have already determined these three probabilities, and either of these three events can be uh, giving rise to one child with albinism and two with normal pigmentation. So now we apply the addition rule and add the probabilities. So now we will add these three probabilities to get the probability of this couple having one child with albinism and two children with normal pigmentation. So this is the way to use the probability. So this cannot be done by using, this cannot be done very easily by using the Punnett scale. So probability has given us a solution, easy solution. So if we want to know the probability of this couple having five children, so two with albinism and three with normal pigmentation, then what will happen? So then figuring out all the different combinations of children and their probabilities becomes more and more difficult. So this task is made easier if we apply the binomial expansion. So this expansion is mostly used in mathematics, but we will be keeping it simple. We would not go into the detail. So binomial takes the form of p plus q raised to the power n, and in this equation, in this formula, p equals the probability of one event and q equals the probability of the alternative event, and small n equals the number of times the event is occurring. So for figuring the probability of 2 out of 5 children with albinism, small p is equal to the probability of a child having albinism, and that is always 1 by 4. And q is the probability of having a normal child, and that is always 3 by 4. So we will calculate all these. We can do the previous method also, but by using the binomial for this situation is p plus q raised to the power 5, because there are 5 children in the family. So there are n is equal to 5. So if we will expand this formula, we will get this whole equation. So each of the terms in the expansion provides the probability for one particular combination of traits in the children. So the first term, which is p raised to the power 5 in the expansion, equals the probability of having 5 children with albinism, because p is the probability of, small p is the probability of albinism. So the second term, uh, 5p raised to the power 4 into q, this equals the probability of having 4 children with albinism and one with normal pigmentation. Similarly, the third term, which is 10 into p raised to the power 3 and q raised to the power 2, this equals the probability of having 3 children with albinism and 2 with normal phenotype, and so forth. So in this way, we can calculate the number of children uh, that are affected. And so to obtain the probability, of any combination of events, we just insert the values of p and q in the respective terms. So the probability of having 2 out of 5 children with albinism will be uh, 10 into p raised to the power 2 into q raised to the power 3. So this means that 2 children will be with albinism and 3 children will be with normal pigmentation. So just putting the values of small p and small q in this equation, we can get the probability of the events in which 2 children will be having albinism, and three children will be normal. So total children are five. Two will be with albinism, and three will be with normal pigmentation. So this probability is 270 out of 1024 events. There is a chance that this family will have two affected children and three normal children. So when we write this probability in decimal, then it is 0.26. So we could easily figure out the probability of any desired combination of albinism and pigmentation among the five children by using the other terms in the expansion. So now the question is that how did we expand the binomial in this example? So it is also very easy. So in general, the expansion of any binomial term p plus q raised to the power n consists of a series of n plus 1 terms. So total uh, n is equal to 5, and when we add plus 1, so there will be total 6 terms. So in the example of albinism, in which two children were with albinism and three were with normal pigmentation, so there are total 6 terms, and these 6 terms are the result of the expansion of that formula. So we can easily expand this. So to write the terms, these are the 6 terms: p raised to the power 5, 5 into p raised to the power 4 into q. Similarly, 10 into p raised to the power 3 and q raised to the power 2, 10 into p raised to the power 2 into q raised to the power 3, and 5 uh, into p into q raised to the power 4, and the q raised to the power 4. So these 6 terms can be obtained by expanding this p plus q raised to the power n formula. So the exponent of p in the first term always begins with the power to which the binomial is raised, and that is n. So the power of first p will be 5 because our n is equal to 5. And in our example, n equals 5, so our first term is p raised to the power 5. So exponent of p decreases by 1 in each successive term. So the exponent of p is 4 in the second term, that is p raised to the power 4, and 3 in the third term, which is p raised to the power 3, and similarly in all other terms. So exponent of q is 0 in the first term, and when exponent is 0, it is always equal to 1, and it increases by 1 in each successive term. So increasing from 0 to 1 in our example. So the next, determine the coefficient of each. When we have configured the exponents, then next step is to determine the coefficient of each term. So the coefficient of the first term is always 1. So in our example, the first term is 1 into p raised to the power 5, so it is just p into p raised to the power 5. So the coefficient of the second term is always same as the power to which the binomial is raised. And in our example, this coefficient is 5, and the term is 5 into p raised to the power 4 into q. And similarly, for the coefficient of the third term, uh, what we will do that we look back at the preceding term and multiply the coefficient of preceding term, that is 5 in our example, by the exponent of p in that term. So then divide this by 2, and so the coefficient of the third term in our example will be 5 into 4 divided by 2, it will be 10. So the term will be 10 into p raised to the power 3 into q raised to the power 2. So by following this procedure for each successive term, we can calculate easily the exponents of uh, the all these terms. So I think this is not difficult. If you will practice or keep in mind the things, you can easily work out the whole binomial equation. So I think it is enough for today. So if you have any question, you can ask during our online session. So thank you and Allah Hafiz till that time.